I never used to believe in the supernatural. Not really. I'd laugh at ghost stories, shake my head at those YouTube videos of shadowy figures caught on grainy security cameras. I always figured there was a logical explanation for everything, until last October. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I took my RV out to Sam Houston National Forest, away from the noise, away from work and responsibilities. Just me, a stack of books, and 2 cases of beer. I even left my phone in the glove compartment, turned off. I told myself I wanted peace, but if I'm honest, I needed the isolation. Life had been heavy lately, and I thought maybe a few days alone in the woods would help me clear my head. The spot I found was perfect. Remote, tucked about 25 miles north of Huntsville, past the usual trails. I had to navigate some winding dirt roads to get there, but by the time I pulled into the clearing, the sky was blushing orange with the sunset. Tall pines loomed around me, the kind that seemed to watch you when the wind blew just right. It felt secluded, exactly what I wanted. I set up camp, unfolded my lawn chair, and watched the sky darken. The fire crackled beside me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I should have left after that first night. I slept deeply at first, wrapped in the quiet hum of the RV heater. But around 3 a.m., something woke me. I couldn't place what it was. I just sat up in bed, feeling like someone had whispered my name. The RV was still, and outside the window, the trees swayed gently under the moonlight. I shook it off as a dream, grabbed a drink of water from the kitchenette, and lay back down. That's when I heard it. Soft. Distant at first. Like the wind through the trees. But it wasn't the wind. Wind doesn't whisper in circles around an RV. It was faint, just beyond the edge of hearing, but unmistakable. The soft cadence of voices. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they were too quiet. Just a murmur, moving around the RV. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another camper somewhere nearby. Maybe a trick of the wind. But there was no one else out there. I forced myself to lie down, pulling the blanket up to my chin like a kid hiding from the monsters under the bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, the sun was pouring through the small window above me, and everything felt normal again. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I spent the day hiking along the trails, pushing the night from my mind. By noon, I almost convinced myself it was just my imagination. Almost. That night, the whispers came back. Louder this time. I woke up, heart racing, and sat perfectly still in the dark. The voices were right outside the RV, moving from window to window. They sounded like children, giggling, murmuring just below their breath. I sat there for nearly an hour, too afraid to move. I kept expecting to see faces press against the fogged glass, but nothing appeared. The whispers faded just before dawn. I told myself I'd imagined it. I was wrong. The next night, things escalated. I woke at 3:13 a.m. I know because I glanced at the small clock on the stove as I sat up. The RV felt colder than usual, like someone had left the door open, but it was locked tight. And then I saw them. Handprints. Tiny, child-sized handprints trailing across the fogged glass of the windshield. I stared at them, breath shallow, heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't moved the RV since I parked. No one had been out there. And yet, there they were, clear as day. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on with trembling fingers, and scanned the inside of the RV. Nothing. I cracked open the door, the cold air biting at my skin as I shone the light around the clearing. The ground was soft from the dew, but there were no footprints. No signs that anyone had been near the RV. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following day, I debated leaving, but something kept me there. Call it pride or curiosity. I convinced myself to stay just one more night. I shouldn't have. I fell asleep around midnight, fully clothed with the flashlight beside me. I told myself I wasn't scared, but I was. The whispers started right on time, just after 3 a.m. Only this time, they didn't stay outside. I woke to the sound of soft giggles inside the RV. I shot up, flashlight shaking in my grip as I swept it across the small space. the kitchenette, the door, the narrow bathroom. And then I saw the prints. Not just on the windshield, on the inside. They trailed along the glass, small and delicate, like someone had pressed their hands there while I was sleeping. I packed up at dawn. I didn't eat, didn't drink my usual morning coffee. I just drove, eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see something crouched in the back seat. I didn't stop until I hit Houston. I told myself I would forget about it, that I would laugh it off in a few months. But I haven't been able to. Because last night, when I walked to my truck to grab something, I noticed the faint trace of handprints on the driver's side window. And I haven't been back to Sam Houston National Forest since. Some nights, when the world is quiet and the shadows seem to stretch a little longer than they should, I hear his voice soft, close, like he's standing right behind me. I know what you did, Lucas. I know everything. It has been 8 years, and I still wake up drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. I don't know if what I saw was real, but I know it was something I was never supposed to encounter. You can tell yourself all you want that ghosts aren't real, that people who vanish into thin air are nothing but stories to scare kids. But if you've been with me on that dark stretch of road near Pismo Beach in September 2016, you wouldn't be so sure. Let me take you back to that night exactly as I remember it. My family and I had been driving up the California coast for days. The RV rattled and groaned with every mile, the engine making a sound like it didn't want to be there any more than I did. It was supposed to be a peaceful, twistle trip. Jenna, my wife, thought it would be good for us. A chance to recharge, she had said. And Adam, our 8-year-old son, loved the idea of sleeping in a house on wheels. Me? I just went along with it. The trouble started late, around midnight. We had parked the RV on a quiet pull-off a few miles outside of Pismo Beach. It was one of those lonely stretches of road, with cliffs on one side and black ocean on the other, the kind of place where headlights only find emptiness when they cut through the dark. I had stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, leaving Jenna and Adam asleep inside. The wind was colder than it should have been for September. It carried the sharp scent of salt and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic, like rusted iron. As I stood there, staring out into the inky black of the ocean, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. A rhythmic crunch of gravel under boots. I froze, my cigarette hanging from my lips. I hadn't heard a car pull up, and there was no one else around for miles. But the footsteps kept coming. I turned around, expecting to see some late-night traveler. Maybe another camper. Instead, I saw him. The hitchhiker. He was standing a few feet away, silhouetted against the RV's dim yellow light. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could see enough. He was tall, lanky, and his clothes hung off him like they didn't quite fit. A tattered gray hoodie, ripped jeans, and boots that looked like they'd walked through hell and back. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his posture oddly still, like he was trying not to scare me. "You got a light?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't used it in years. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the creeping unease crawling up my spine. "Yeah, sure." My hands were trembling as I pulled out my lighter and flicked the flame to life. The hitchhiker stepped closer, just enough for me to see his face. His skin was pale, almost gray, like he hadn't seen sunlight in months. His eyes. God. His eyes were what I remember most. They were too wide, too bright, and the irises seemed to shimmer in the light, like oil floating on water. He grinned a slow, unnatural smile that didn't reach those shimmering eyes. "Thanks, Lucas." I froze. My heart stopped mid-beat. "How do you know my name?" He just stared at me, unblinking. That horrible grin still stretched across his face. I took a step back, my mind racing. Maybe he had seen the RV. Maybe Jenna or Adam had mentioned my name earlier. That made sense, didn't it? But deep down, I knew there was no way. Jenna and Adam had been asleep for hours. "It's a nice family you've got in there," he said, nodding towards the RV. "Jenna and Adam, right?" I dropped the cigarette, my pulse thundering in my ears. I could feel the blood drain from my face. "Who the hell are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his boots grinding against the gravel. The wind picked up, whistling through the cliffs. but I swear it sounded like whispering low voices carried on the air, speaking words I couldn't understand. I stumbled back toward the RV, fumbling for the door handle. I wanted to run, to slam the door in his face and pretend I hadn't just spoken to something that shouldn't exist. But when I looked up, he was gone. Vanished. There was no sound, no footsteps, no movement. Just the empty stretch of road and the wind screaming through the dark. I climbed back into the RV and locked the door behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely twist the deadbolt. I stood there in the dark for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. The wind howled outside, and the RV creaked in response. I turned to check on Jenna and Adam, half expecting to see that hitchhiker standing over them, but they were still sound asleep. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat with my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching for any sign of movement. Morning came slowly, the sun creeping over the horizon like it didn't want to be there either. I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. That maybe I'd been too tired, or maybe the darkness had played tricks on me. We packed up and hit the road early. Jenna was in good spirits, humming along to some song on the radio, and Adam sat in the back, flipping through a comic book. I kept my eyes on the road, my fingers white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every so often, I would glance at the side mirrors, half expecting to see that pale face grinning back at me. And then I saw him. We were halfway to Monterey, driving through a long stretch of empty highway, when I caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A figure standing by the side of the road, his thumb stuck out in that universal hitchhiking gesture. It was him, the same gray hoodie, the same two wide eyes. "Lucas!" Jenna's voice made me jump. I glanced over at her, trying to hide the terror on my face. "Yeah? Did you see that guy back there?" My mouth went dry. I nodded. "Yeah, I saw him. He looked weird, didn't he?" I didn't answer. I didn't answer. I couldn't. We drove on in silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, watching us. That night, we stopped at a crowded RV park near Monterey, surrounded by families and laughter. It should have felt safe. It didn't. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, like fingernails against glass. I sat up, my heart pounding. The RV was dark, Jenna and Adam still fast asleep. I listened, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. I turned my head slowly, the air feeling thick and heavy, like I was moving underwater. He was there. The hitchhiker stood just outside the window, his face inches from the glass. His skin was paler than before, almost translucent, and his grin was wider. Too wide. His teeth were sharp and gleaming like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "I told you, Lucas. I know everything." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring into those impossible eyes as the tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. And then he was gone. The next morning, I told Jenna we were cutting the trip short. I made up some excuse about work, but I think she could tell something was wrong. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there, to put as many miles as possible between us and whatever that thing was. We made it back home in 2 days. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I found a photograph tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. It was a picture of the RV. Our RV parked on that lonely pull-off near Pismo Beach. In the corner of the photo, you could see a figure standing in the shadows. The hitchhiker. That was 8 years ago. I moved my family to a different state. I changed my job, my routines, everything I could think of to shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting. But every so often, I catch a glimpse of something. A figure by the side of the road, or a shadow where there shouldn't be one. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. And I know he's still watching. I didn't sleep that night. The wind picked up, howling through the mountains, but it wasn't just the wind anymore. That damn whistle. It cut through the night like a blade, sharp and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was doing it was right behind me, breathing down my neck. My eyes flicked to every shadow in the distance, but all I saw were the jagged silhouettes of rocks, cast long and distorted in the moonlight. The air felt alive. Too alive, like it was watching, waiting. Every gust of wind made the hairs on my arms stand straight. I tried to tell myself it was just a bird, or maybe a breeze playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I was too exhausted to even process what had happened. But when I unzipped my tent, my stomach lurched in terror. I didn't see it right away. I should have. But when I stepped outside, there was something wrong, something off, about the way the dirt around my campsite had shifted. The ground was clawed up, deep gouges like animal tracks, but they were too large, too uneven. The dirt wasn't just scratched, it was ripped open, as though something huge, something feral, had scraped its way across the earth. The pattern was all wrong. These weren't the usual marks you'd see from a coyote or a bear. These were jagged, erratic, unnatural, like a hand. No. Claws had torn into the earth itself, digging deep into the soil. And as I stood there, I could feel something shift in the air. The temperature dropping, the tension thick and suffocating. But it wasn't just the ground that unnerved me. I turned, and my stomach sank like I'd been punched in the gut. My RV was parked nearby, and it was covered. At first, I thought it was some kind of shadow or dirt, but then I saw the truth. The sides of the RV were marked, covered in claw marks. Deep slashing gashes that went through the metal, tearing at the surface like some animal had used its talons to scratch at it for hours. No animal could have done that. No coyote. No bear. And I knew, even then, that whatever had made those marks was still out there, watching me, waiting. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at those scratches, my heart hammering in my chest. But something was off about the air. It was too still, too quiet. Not even the wind stirred. It was as if the desert had fallen silent in the face of whatever was stalking me. I wanted to move, to run, but my feet wouldn't cooperate. I was rooted to the spot, the adrenaline and fear coursing through me, making my head spin. Then, it came again. That whistle. But this time, it was different. This time, it was close. I whipped around, my heart thumping in my throat, the air thick with a sickening sense of dread. There was nothing there. Just the same jagged rocks and dead brush, the same oppressive desert stretching on for miles. But I could feel it. Feel something moving. Something unnatural. Just outside. The edge of my vision. A flicker in the shadows. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. I don't know how much time passed. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But I couldn't stand there anymore. I grabbed my backpack, threw everything into the car, and started the engine. I was panicked, my hands shaking, the cold sweat sticking to my back. I didn't care about the damage to the RV or my gear. I needed to leave. But as I pulled away from the campsite, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A figure. It was standing in the distance, just on the edge of the road, too far to make out clearly. But there was no mistaking the shape of it. Tall, gaunt, with long, thin limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its head was tilted to the side, like it was studying me, watching me. Its body barely moved in the windless air, as though it was waiting. I slammed my foot down on the gas, the engine roaring as I sped down the road. The image of that thing seared into my mind. I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. Maybe it was just some weird trick of the light, the kind of thing your mind plays on you when you're alone in the wilderness for too long. But the further I drove, the more I realized that whatever I had seen was real. And it was still following me. I could feel it. Every nerve in my body screaming. A constant weight on my chest. I didn't stop driving for hours. Not until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon and the oppressive, choking darkness began to lift. I finally pulled over at a small diner on the outskirts of the park, my hands shaking as I reached for the door handle. When I stepped out, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like the air itself had shifted, thickened, as if the desert was holding its breath. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. The rangers at the entrance asked if everything had been okay, but I just nodded, muttering something about rough weather and needing a break. The whistle, the scratches, that thing, I didn't want to talk about it. I couldn't. They wouldn't believe me. But I wasn't the only one who heard it. Weeks later, I found out through a series of whispers and rumors from other campers who had been in Big Bend that same night. They had heard the same damn whistle, the same scratching, the same feeling of being hunted. Some of them hadn't stuck around long enough to see the damage I had witnessed on my RV. Others had. But they had all said the same thing. They saw something out there. Something tall and strange. Something unnatural. Park rangers were baffled. They found no evidence of any wildlife in the area. No tracks, no clues, just the claw marks. Just the strange, eerie whistling in the night. They claimed it was just a freak occurrence, a fluke, but I knew better. I had felt it, I had seen it, and I knew it was still out there. That night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear that whistle, clear as ever. Too close, too real. I didn't dare look out the window. I couldn't. I could still feel the weight of those eyes on me, the oppressive feeling that had followed me from the desert. And somewhere, out there, in the silent, endless dark, something was waiting for me to come back. Something was watching, listening for that familiar, terrified sound. But this time, I wouldn't make the mistake of running. Next time, it would find me. It was early April 2023 when I decided to take a trip to Ruby Valley Campground in Nevada. I had heard it was a quiet, scenic place. A stretch of raw, untamed beauty nestled between the Ruby Mountains and the Humboldt Range. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was how deeply this trip would alter the very fabric of my understanding of reality. I pulled into the campground late in the afternoon, the sun slipping lazily behind jagged peaks. Shadows stretched long and crooked across the dusty ground. The air had a peculiar stillness, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder, half expecting someone or something to be there. The campground wasn't crowded, just a couple of RVs scattered here and there. I parked my car near a picnic table that stood under a massive juniper tree, its gnarled branches twisting skyward like skeletal fingers. The table looked off. Its weathered surface was splintered and warped as if it had been sitting there for decades, enduring years of storms, sun, and snow. But it wasn't the age of the table that unsettled me. It was the way the shadows pooled around it, deeper and darker than they had any right to be. The dying sunlight touched everything else around me. Trees, rocks, even my car. But the table seemed untouched by it, as though it existed in a pocket of perpetual twilight. I brushed off the unease, convincing myself I was just tired from the drive. I set up my tent nearby and decided to eat dinner at the picnic table. As I sat there, the air grew colder, unnaturally so, and I noticed something strange. No birds chirped, no crickets sang. The silence pressed against me like a weight, filling my ears with the sound of my own breathing. Then, I saw it. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I squinted into the growing darkness, I realized there was a figure sitting at the far end of the table. It was barely more than a shadow, an outline of something vaguely human. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. I stood up, my legs shaky, and took a cautious step toward it. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. Its edges were blurry, indistinct, as though it wasn't fully there. And yet, I could feel its presence, an oppressive, suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. "Are you okay?" I tried again. No response. I took another step closer, and that's when it moved. Not in the way a person shifts or turns, but in a way that defied explanation. One moment it was sitting at the table, the next it was standing beside me. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting with fear. The figure had no face, no features. Just an empty void where a face should be. It radiated a cold so intense it burned, like standing in the heart of a glacier. I don't remember running to my car, but the next thing I knew, I was inside with the doors locked, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The figure was gone. Or so I thought. When I glanced at the picnic table, it was there again, sitting as still as a statue. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my car, watching the shadow figure, my mind racing with every possible explanation. A hallucination? A prank? Some twisted product of my overactive imagination? But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I dared to step out of the car. The shadow figure was gone, leaving the picnic table looking ordinary again. But the air still felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I packed up my things as quickly as I could, desperate to leave. As I folded my tent, I noticed something etched into the wood of the picnic table. At first, it looked like random scratches, but as I stared at it, the marks formed words. "It sees you." My blood turned to ice. I drove away from Ruby Valley Campground that morning, swearing never to return. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that I am being watched. At night, in the quiet of my apartment, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye. When I turn to look, there's nothing there, but I know better now. It's still with me. I have never been one for ghost stories. I always chalked them up to superstition or overactive imaginations. But what happened to me and my wife at Palo Duro Canyon last fall changed everything. I haven't told many people about it, mainly because I don't want to relive it. But maybe writing it down will help. We had been planning the trip for months. Rachel, my wife, had been dying to take the RV out for a weekend, and the weather was perfect. Palo Duro Canyon was supposed to be breathtaking that time of year. Crisp autumn air, burnt orange foliage, and just enough chill at night to make campfires worthwhile. We pulled into the campground late Friday afternoon. The sun was dipping below the canyon rim, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. There weren't many other campers around, just a few scattered RVs and tents in the distance. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Rachel and I set up our site, grilled some burgers, and sat by the fire as the stars blinked into the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the canyon walls, carrying a faint, distant echo that seemed to shift direction every few moments. Rachel joked that it sounded like someone humming. I brushed it off, told her it was probably just the wind playing tricks. By midnight, we crawled into the RV, both exhausted from the drive and a little buzzed from the wine. Rachel fell asleep almost instantly. I lay awake, listening to the sounds outside. The crackling fire had dwindled to glowing embers, and the hum of the wind was now punctuated by something else. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a coyote or a deer sniffing around the site. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It circled the RV, slow and steady. Gravel crunched under each step, one after another, like someone pacing. I didn't want to wake Rachel. She had a tendency to panic, and I figured it would pass. But after 15 minutes of that slow, relentless circling, I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly slid out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and peeked through the small window by the kitchenette. Nothing. The firelight barely reached the edge of the RV, but beyond that, there was just darkness. I opened the door, stepped outside, and shined the flashlight around the site. The beam cut through the night, illuminating the trees and the empty picnic table. Still, nothing. The footsteps had stopped. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for anything to emerge from the shadows. But the only sound was the wind scraping against the canyon walls. Finally, I locked the RV and climbed back into bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. I woke up to Rachel screaming. She was standing by the RV door, her hand trembling as she pointed at the window. The glass was smeared with handprints, long, pale smudges that stretched across the entire pane. Dozens of them. Some small, like a child's. Others larger, more defined. But they were everywhere, crisscrossing in patterns that made no sense. "Did you do this?" Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the terror in it. "Why would I do that?" I snapped, stepping closer to inspect the prints. They weren't ours. The smears were greasy, almost translucent, as if the hands that made them were damp. I pressed my palm against one, measuring the size. It was larger than mine by at least an inch. I checked the door. Locked. Same with the windows. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had left those prints had done it from the outside, but there were no footprints in the dirt beneath the window. Nothing. Rachel wanted to leave immediately. I can't blame her. But I convinced her to stay, at least until sunrise. We spent the next few hours huddled together, every creak of the RV making us jump. When the first light bled over the canyon, I stepped outside again. The handprints were gone. Not just faded or washed away. Gone. As if they had never been there at all. Rachel swore up and down that she hadn't imagined them, and I knew better than to doubt her. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our trip short. Weeks passed, and we tried to forget about it. But Palo Duro stayed with us. Rachel refused to camp anymore, and I started triple-checking the locks at night. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I hear footsteps outside our house. I tell myself it's nothing. But some nights, when I look out the window, I swear I see faint smudges on the glass. They're not there in the morning.